Just to explain a little bit about myself, when I'm not doing this sort of thing, I'm a journalist and broadcaster, and particularly in the leadership, management and HR space. And I've been delighted to be working with top employers for the last couple of years around a lot of these subjects. And I'm really happy to be chairing this particular session because it's one of my favourite subjects of leadership development. I think we should probably just reflect for a second on the brilliant presentations that Viv and Suzanne and Joe and Phil gave this morning. And certain things kind of came out of that to me. One was the sort of almost overwhelming number of top employers who had clear objectives for their leadership development strategy. Another was Suzanne's comment about leaders, having to sort of demonstrate the behaviours, to listen and not just tell. That came across and resonated with me. And also there were a number of mentions about the issue around, well, what does talent and the development of talent and leadership mean at every part of the organisation? And so those are three aspects that particularly struck me for this panel, which, as Phil rightly said, is about leadership tomorrow, but it's also got getting current and future leaders for an uncertain future. Uncertain future, there's lots of uncertainty around at the moment, and we've said through the morning that the way the organisations manage talent is crucial for their successful transformation, and so developing talent amongst leaders, as I'm sure you will all agree, is absolutely crucial. So certain things spring to mind for me is, how do we get those leaders to be the very personification of change? How do we make sure that those coming up behind them are ready to behave in a way, well, what way? We don't really know yet because we don't know what we need them to be because everything's changing so much. And then finally, what do we even mean by leadership these days? I mean, it's an important question, and it's not quite as simple as a question as it might seem. So here to help me find the answers to these questions, and by the way, this isn't just me talking to these guys. I'm relying on you guys to actually ask some questions as well. I've got a few questions, but you'll have much better questions than me. So I'll warm them up with a few, and then I want you to join in and ask a few as well through the Slido app and website. But over here, I've got Ramkumar Chandrasekaran, who's HR Director at TCS, which stands for Tata Consultancy Services. Next to him, I've got Andrew Armes, the UK Head of Talent Acquisition at Roche. And of course, our very own Adrian Seligman, Chief Commercial Officer at the Top Employers Institute. So I'll get to the questions now, really, and just reflecting on the questions that I sort of started off with, and let's just sort of start to delve into those a little bit. If I could ask you, Ram, first, how do we make sure that the leaders that we're developing are really, truly change leaders who are actually going to shake things up because they need to?
Thank you for the question. Before I answer, just a 1 minute brief about the company I represent, because it's important that you get the context of the change that we were in. Right? Tata Consultancy Services is an IT services consulting firm. Globally, we have about 450,000 employees, and UK 18,000. And 4 years back, the whole industry and the company was sort of, I would say, not about fighting for survival. Right? The future wasn't very clear. The whole digital transformation completely transformed the industries. There are about three major changes. Right? The ways of working, how we know about how we deliver IT projects, the waterfall model, completely changed. We had to embrace new ways of working, which means completely different new leadership styles, new ways of communication, new ways of managing people. Right? Our earlier structure of command and control did not exist, and TCS, for a large measure, was a relatively conservative company and a little bit hierarchical. And now here, the agile way, being hierarchical and conservative, just doesn't work. That is number one. Number two is a completely new set of skill sets. Right? And what we knew earlier was no longer relevant. So new ways of working, new skill sets, and a whole new value proposition to the customer. So we've always made our money making IT operations efficient, so the cost mindset. Now customers are saying that I want to transform digitally. Are you there? Are you going to help me or not? So from a cost mindset to a growth and transformation mindset. And this change happened overnight. So there is no way as an organization we could transform ourselves without very relevant question, making the leaders as change agents. So I'll just leave you with two perspectives which sort of work for us, and 5 years later, I think it has really worked brilliantly. So we are still now one of the fastest growing companies in the world in IT services, and 4 years, believe me, it was not the case. And two things. One is, it's about us, the leadership, communicating the need for change. So there can be digital, there can be a lot of new changes, but some good old ways of managing change never changes. Clearly communicating the need for change. So we really worked on it. We had a business 4.0 framework. What does change looks like, and how this change is going to impact our customers, the society, and what is in it for you. If you are part of the change, what is in it for you, for the leaders? That is number one. Number two is creating a culture of risk-taking. Because if you want leaders to be change agents, the biggest fear is, I'm going to take a risk, what it is for my career. Right? Create that culture of risk-taking in terms of celebrate. So there'll be certain set of leaders who will embrace change faster. Celebrate those leaders. In fact, we had leaders who handled, our change was like earlier you used to handle 15,000 people, 20,000 people under your portfolio, big units. And suddenly you embrace, a leader of infrastructure services, which had 15,000 people, moved to take over a new practice called automation, had 0 people, and completely new. So we celebrated these role models. Second is we measured success by the effort and ability to embrace change, not by the results. Right? And this was an important change. Because when you embrace change, there will be failures. So do not measure success by, so if you can always be in your safe zone, keep delivering well. And we also did the opposite. If you're delivering well, but you haven't embraced change, keep doing the same stuff, right? They stopped growing and they weren't rewarded. So creating a culture of change and communicating the need for change, I think there are a number of things, but two most important things that I think are required. It worked for us in making leaders as change agents.
Okay, that's great. Andrew, do you have...
So if I can add anything to that, which is fantastic. So a little bit of context about Roche as well. It's a healthcare organisation, and we are 2,000 people in the UK, 100,000 people globally. But we are all about unmet medical need. So we are all about innovation. And so the idea of kind of creativity and innovation is absolutely critical for our own business success. So we have some level of kind of sophistication required around leadership as well that's actually totally linked to how all of our employees, create innovation in the organisation. But just to build on that is, if I could bring it to a kind of mindset addition, is our leaders are on this journey of letting go of this idea of being experts, and that people would come to them for the final answer or a sign-off or the solution, and getting them to move to coach or into that kind of space of unlocking the kind of wisdom of the people that they might be supporting. Yeah. And that's a very sophisticated journey from a structural perspective for an organisation to go on, whether that means moving from hierarchies to kind of Scrum-like or agile organisations and how you kind of make that up. But really deep down underneath that from a leader's perspective is that ability to let go of this idea of how I've created value in the past is to be the expert. Yeah. And that is a journey of overcoming our fears, our egos, really looking at what might be kind of building our confidence, whether it's false or accurate, underneath. And so it's a neuroscientific, a behavioural journey that we're taking our leaders on and everybody in the organisation on. But for leaders, that's, just to add on Ram's, that's what I would kind of add to that.
Okay. Adrian?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. My HR top trumps are going to fail very badly because Phil's already introduced the business, and we're a business of 130 people. So really, my role here is perhaps to share some of the experiences that come from our participants, and also the data that we have within top employers. One of the things that we see is we document best practice as a business, and we survey against best practice, as you know, and that's a tricky continuum. You can't drag in next practices. And as Ram said, the pace of change around an area like leadership has been so fast that quite often what we see and what we hear from top employers at events like these and others is just that where they're succeeding, it's where there's an openness to realise the answer might not be in your business. And again, as Phil shared some data showing that current leaders are very, very well engaged when it comes to supporting leaders in the business. They're there on programs, they're helping design leadership competencies, they're working on the strategy around it very closely with HR, and that's fantastic. So talent's top of the radar. But that's relying on existing and skills and knowledge to solve a problem that's around us. And one example for me that really stands out was with an FMCG business, and this was in Africa. We had an event focused on Agile for some senior HR leaders in Johannesburg, about 15 people around a table. And at that meeting, 2 HR directors who hadn't met before met each other. And this was before the certification dinner in the afternoon. And so you had a HRD from an FMCG business alongside another HRD from an IT services business, not your one, Ram, a different one. Just started talking about Agile, talking about their struggles with it. You know, it's easy to talk about, but very hard to bring it alive in organisations. Right. And this conversation continued over dinner. And the next morning, both of them were then involved in a television event, and we were also on this TV event to do with the Top Employers programme. They'd agreed that they were going to take 10 senior leaders from HR of each business, and these businesses employ about 200,000 people, so there's some depth within HR. They were going to swap them for a whole year, just to focus on how does that other business work on change, activate change, think about Agile, and then bring them back in. Yeah. And we're desperate to find what's going to happen. So but by October, we'll be going back and finding out and look forward to sharing it. So just that idea that sometimes it doesn't have to be, the answers don't have to be inside. Yeah,
and that's great. I had a couple of other questions sort of lined up, but you're already taking over with your questions, which is brilliant. I've got to address one thing directly. One question was, you mentioned it was intentional that the panel are all sat on one side of the stage. Is it equally intentional that they are all male? The answer is no. In fact, we actually did have more diversity in the balance, but unfortunately that panelist had to pull out at the last minute, so the intentions were actually diverse. So whoever asked that question, it was a great question. So
I was the last minute substitute for that. So just showing my agile mindset. You know, they asked me yesterday, no, a few days ago. So
yeah. So you know,
representation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question was, I'm hearing a lot about the importance of inclusive leadership and the need for this. What are your views on the panel? I mean, is inclusive leadership one of those things that leaders, you know, that we all talk about? I mean, it's one of those comfortable words that everybody sort of wants to use. But I mean, are there particular examples in your organisations, or do you have a particular perspectives, or does the research sort of tell us anything about, you know, inclusivity? Is it buzzword, or is it something that people are genuinely doing as well as talking about?
Okay. So.
Sorry, well, let's switch around.
Yeah, so you want me to go?
Give you a break round.
Yes.
Yeah, so inclusion, that's a whole massive topic, right? So for us, inclusion is actually a USP for us, because inclusion is where innovation comes from. Because it could be great, you can have the most diverse workforce that you like, and you know, diverse leadership and levels in the organisation and what have you, but if nobody feels included, you know, you're not going to get the co-creation out of that. So for us, inclusion is actually business success. And for us, it just boils down to a very simple behaviour that we encourage in all of our employees, and not just leaders, but obviously leaders can help others to encourage it as well, is this ability to listen and the quality of listening. And and we kind of frame it in 3 ways. The first one is to actually listen to yourself. You know, what is going on for you? Where are you in this conversation, or in this role, or in whatever it is? And to be honest with that and own it. You know, and recognise that might be getting in the way, or how is it facilitating this kind of inclusion of everybody else? So be clear about what you're hearing about yourself is the first step. Yeah. The second step is then what is somebody else saying to you? Are you able to listen clearly and just be in kind of receipt of what they're saying, in non-judgment? You know, just actually hear what they've got to say. So there's a quality of listening there. And then the third thing for us is to ensure it's inclusive is, what is then not being said? Can you hear what is not being said? Yeah. So that they might not be saying it, or something that you're not saying, is to really kind of not walk away from that conversation or that interaction or that team meeting without going, something feels like it was left unsaid, and this is what I feel it is. Yeah. What else do we think it is? Because that might be somebody that's sitting over there saying they're being included. It's
very difficult to articulate sometimes, though, because you might not know yourself, you know, exactly what it is that's...
Yeah, I'd say the quality of listening is poor generally across the whole of society, right? So yeah, just, you know, encouraging that, and giving space and time, and all of our, we have other training programs, obviously, but most of our training programs always have that almost like this is a key skill that we're going to be developing in all of our L&D activities, all of our development activities, whatever it might be that you're doing, just giving people that chance to think about how can my listening be improved. So that's inclusion for us, and without it, we would fail.
Adrian, did you want to add anything there? Or?
Yeah, I think well, from an inclusion point of view, also when it comes to leadership, there's never been probably a more exciting time, because to affect real change, I think companies now realise that social change is incredibly powerful. So with the old top-down approach doesn't work anymore, doesn't get the results. That there's masses of research on projects that fail because of that. So there's the most amazing opportunity for new leaders to shine. And I'm a cricketing dad. My son's a 7-year-old who plays cricket, and one of the other dads there is he's a leadership trainer at Sandhurst, so he's a major in the army. And just in prepping for this, I had a conversation with him last weekend on that. And you think the army is a very hierarchical area. Inclusiveness is something that's certainly worked on, but actually they're quite far ahead when it comes to this. And what struck me hearing him speak about how they set things up and how they describe things and really create an environment is they work equally on the negative as well as the positive. My sense from some of the organisations I've experienced with, there's an awful lot of work around setting the right environment and describing what good looks like and how good managers and good leaders should set that environment, and less necessarily on the negative. And actually within the army that's different, so they almost balance it 50-50, and they have this thing called the toxic triangle, where they're very open with what does bad leadership look like and the impact on inclusion and the limiting effect. And then they talk about bad followership as well, so they talk about susceptible followers and what that means, which obviously in the field, but just they have major IT projects as well, which is where he was coming from, and the impact then on the environment. So that's what I took away, just that balance between the good, the bad, to help people really understand.
Yes. Ram.
Yeah, just I think 2 brilliant points. Practically, these two things work. When you talk about inclusion, we can't overstate the impact of listening, right? And generally, we see a lot of poor listeners. See, in addition to that, so the way we had articulated inclusion, there is a lot of research that shows that inclusive behavior, you make better leaders and all that. But practically, when you look in organizations, one of the primary results that we are looking for is innovation, right? And second is ability to navigate change. And it's plain and simple that the more inclusive you are, the more innovative your teams are, right? And the results are therefore, you can look at innovative teams, there'll always be much more inclusive, diverse teams. And the second is when we are talking about leaders being change agents. The moment you start, so we talk about agile, new way of working, digital, the moment our communication and templates can only get you so far. The moment you start delivering, there'll be so many unanswered questions that you need to figure out. And your inclusive leadership style helps you navigate that. So what we do is, in terms of success stories, in terms of case studies, we communicate a lot of, inclusive leadership style leads to, so we talk less about inclusion, more about innovation and ability to navigate change, and then drive the message of being inclusive. Inclusive leadership gives you better results.
So are you saying then that inclusivity, it almost creates its own kind of toolkit,
Absolutely.
It's a self-perpetuating engine or some
Absolutely.
other metaphor.
Absolutely. See, because one is it has to, managers have to realize that it's no longer the nice thing to do, right? And I want to be a great leader, so I have to do it. No, I have to succeed. If I'm not inclusive, I'm definitely going to fail.
Right.
And on that self, the value of it is, spreads far and wide. The skill of doing it, if I can, be particularly provocative, is like, if you're really being heard at work, right, that has a kind of psychological, emotional, physical benefit for you, whether you're kind of creating something or not in that particular moment. You're actually feeling valued. You're actually so it's way above kind of innovation potentially. That the value is at a well-being level of feeling included. So and when you create something out of inclusion, there is also that wonderful feeling of, God, we would never have done this. If we hadn't all felt included in that particular project. So there's the celebration element and the kind of just recognizing that, the individual parts added together would never have got to that unless we'd been inclusive about it as well.
One question just came in. It's not the top of the pile in terms of votes, but I just want to throw it in there because I quite like it. It's I mean, if the future's so uncertain, and we can fall into a sort of everything's uncertain, disruptive. Oh my goodness, you know. If the future's so uncertain, shouldn't we be teaching resilience more within leadership? I mean, do you have resilience courses, modules, systems at all?
So I can take that. But but where does the resilience come from? And that's what we're developing. It's not people that can come in and deal with a choice or a preference that they're not very happy about, because that's unsustainable.
Yeah.
It's like helping them to realise where their resilience comes from and build it from that point. And that takes that high level of listening to self-knowledge. Where are you? Understanding yourself. Because if you're deeply motivated about what you're going to do, right, you've got that's a key step. If you're really not engaged in what's happening, it's like get out of the way, let somebody else do it.
Yeah.
Right? If you're deeply, if you've got that core connection, that's going to help your resilience. Rather than going, oh, this is something that we just help people deal with the kind of the causality, the kind of not a causal level is what I'm talking about. Is really looking at where resilience comes from, and we actually assess for that. It's like because that's when it comes to selecting people, we want to make sure it's a really great match between what the work is we're going to be asking them to do or the challenge they're facing and what they really want to get out of life. Or, and we use tools that are actually called like resilience questionnaires in order to help us probe at the selection process whether this person is deeply connected and motivated about the job that they're going to be doing. So it's termed resilience, but you could call it something else, suitability for role or motivations, but absolutely critical for us. But not a kind of, I can slog at this forever, I am resilient. It comes from a source of strength, and therefore being agile because you've got that balance and grounding.
Yeah. I'm going to zone in on one popular question. It was kind of what I was thinking of asking, but it's much better than what I was thinking of asking, so I'm going to jump in and piggyback on that one. It's how do you identify future leaders, separating the technical specialists from the true leaders early enough to develop and hone their capabilities? I mean, I suppose, this is all about succession pipeline, future leadership, and also probably is saying something about the old-fashioned, the only way is up, might not be, isn't true anymore. That actually the way is not just up, but it's in lots of different directions as well. So I mean, Adrian, have you sort of got any thoughts about that succession pipeline, future leader development?
Yeah, this is a question that comes up, and again, it's firmly in that next practice category rather than something that's settled. What we hear across the board really is that you could almost sum it up as digital dexterity is one of the descriptors, and that's a mix of hard skills and soft skills as well. So under the hard skills, you've got things like AI, machine learning, design thinking. These are the things that we see they're being selected for at senior level within organisations. They're not necessarily skills which have been in the organisation before. And then on the soft side, we've talked about agile and other methodologies, other ways of thinking. All the classic leadership pieces we have now about your success being measured in your ability to put other people there on the pedestal and have their success, and some of the inclusiveness that we've talked about. It was, I think it was Gartner. So I came from Gartner and CV before I came to Top Employers, and Gartner's just released a quite interesting bit of research on this. So they've defined digital dexterity across these areas, and then they've gone to look for it, and it's kind of naturally innate to about 9% of individuals across your organisation. And then there's some myths around it as well. So myth number one was, do millennials have loads of this? And of course the answer is no, it's still about 9%. The other myth was, do those in IT naturally have this magic digital dexterity? And again, no, it's absolutely balanced across the age ranges, across the different pools. And they went further looking for what are the competencies that are underneath. The one that really helped people was just straight business acumen, actually. That had the closest correlation to finding those people with really good business acumen who would flourish in that sort of change environment with projects. So yes, it's not the classic ways or some of those myths that are out there don't necessarily hold true. But I think, Andrew, you mentioned assessment as well. It would be a very interesting project for someone to set up and look for this magic digital dexterity to perhaps start fast-tracking some people.
Yeah. What's your view on future?
Yeah, so, can't agree more in terms of digital dexterity, business acumen. So these are all very, very important. But practically, how do you sort of hone in these kind of skills, right? So one experience which has helped us is that you look for, in terms of identifying future leaders, normal method most organization follows is there is assessment, there are various ways, but one of the important aspects is the feedback from the supervisor, right? The leadership team, they identify people as potential leaders, right? And we also used to do that, but we have sort of changed that. In fact, there is 4-step feedback which helps us identify future leaders. One is feedback from the customer, because all this digital dexterity, embracing change, how it translates as value to customer. Because we are talking about a change in mindset, and most organizations are talking about change in mindset. For us, it's from cost to growth and transformation. Does the customer actually perceive that? So feedback from the customer, feedback from the team, and feedback from peers. Because in this environment, the ability to take multiple stakeholders along is so key. And the fourth is feedback from supervisor, right? And so you can have a number of parameter skills that you look for, but you have to validate that, and I think it's at least work for us, that, go in this order. What the customer thinks about the person, and what the peers think about the person, what the team, and as well as the supervisor, right? And that really helps. The second most important, you alluded to it, extremely important, it's not the traditional leaders in the organization the way we think about it. For example, now we have one whole leadership category which is called, it's not leaders in that, sense of the term of managing people. We have something called as the digital champions. Right? That is something which did not exist 3-4 years back. They are all people like, coming back to the change agents. They are people who have actually embraced this digital transformation and added phenomenal value to the customer. So we tell their stories, right? We let them influence, go to multiple people. So we have 450,000 employees. They go to various places, tell about their stories. We publish their stories. They influence others. Learning influencers, right? We have a number of new categories where people actually influence others to get into this journey, tell their stories, talk about it, right? So we have five different categories which did not, traditionally fit into that leadership, but they are our leaders, right? And these can eventually, potentially be our future leaders.
Yes.
So where you get the feedback, how do you measure that? And the new kind of leaders, how do you groom them?
Yes.
I think that's very important.
Right. I'm just going to move on a little bit. A really interesting question around something you alluded to, Andrew, earlier about you used the phrase leaders as coaches, and there's a lot of interest in the subject of how do you move from a hierarchical structure to leaders as coaches, and have there been critical success factors that have sort of helped you in terms of introducing a kind of coaching culture? I don't know who wants to take that.
I can start. And again, the evolution of your organisation and what you're trying to achieve. It can be. I'm just talking about what's working for us, as it seems, and we are on this journey of agility and transformation. So I'm not saying we've mastered this yet. There are certainly things that we're coming up against. So for us, we are moving to essentially a Scrum-based environment. So we're taking hierarchies out. And if you take that to kind of like the next level, that means job descriptions are going. That means job titles are going. These are all things that we are now challenging. So, and I would say, for the people maybe in this room, it's just something maybe to consider if this is also a challenge that you might be facing and thinking about becoming coaches and unlocking the wisdom of your whole organisation and the democratisation of strategy is we've got to let go of our need for control in HR, this idea that we're going to create value or we're going to kind of guide people, and this is the way that you're going to do it. It's got to start with us as well. If we're going to still be kind of helping the organisation to do this in the future, we've got to let go of structures and maybe the things that how we've been operating as well. So that's a critical stuff for us to help the organisation to become coaches and unlock the wisdom. Is we've got to do it for us. We've got to be the highest expressions of it, almost really, if we want to be adding that value in the future.
Adrian, you must be noticing, amongst sort of member organisations, this sort of change in the style of leadership sort of going on.
Yeah, definitely, and probably a very good example actually with our own business for that one, which is very close to home. So I've been 18 months or so within Top Employers, and I would say we were a very top-down led business. We have 10 offices around the world, so a lot boutique operations and a slightly larger HQ. So to have a global certification with a global standard requires quite a bit of stuff being pushed out from the centre to keep the rigour. So it's understandable how we got there. We're in the middle of a large digitalisation programme like every other organisation, all of you in the room at the moment. And it's now the centre of the business. It's going all the way from marketing at the front end through to cash, and then the whole customer life cycle back to start again. So we'll change everything into a much more of a cloud-based business. And in the run-up to that, there was a whole strategy on how do we activate the organisation, and that started with a series of strategic projects, which just alone was different. 3 projects where it didn't matter what your job title was, where you sat in the organisation, and that was almost like training to retrain the organisation that your opinion mattered, you could be involved, you could have an impact. And where we are now is fantastic. We're using an agile methodology for this programme, and we have a war room over in Amsterdam. Various value teams made up. It used to be the library, but it's been changed into this meeting where the Scrum meetings happen.
Right.
But it touches everybody in the organisation, and now there's bi-weekly Scrum meetings where they look at prioritising the what is coming next, and it's standing room only. And these are people who are not involved in the project. So it's a small business, so it's much easier for a business our size, but it's been a dramatic shift from top-down tell leadership to activating what is large-scale, scary change across the organisation, where most people are excited and just delighted to be involved and contributing in a completely different way.
We've got oodles of questions. I'm sort of keen to make the most of the last sort of 10 minutes, but I'll start off with you on this next one, Ram. Just one quick thing was that this is the thing I love about Slido is that having asked a question about resilience, somebody else is asking a question: is resilience not a term that's overused? Another fair question. I'm not going to ask that question because then we'll overuse it a bit more. So everyone can have their opinions on that. Really, we talked about innovation a few minutes ago, but one question is, how do you encourage a risk-taking culture? Is it down to the things that you've already talked about, or are there other things? Is risk-taking a kind of broader sense than what we've been talking about thus far?
Yeah. So if you look at, our learning is when you want to promote that risk-taking culture, people generally do not want to take risk because they are afraid of failures, right? I would even go to the extent of you have to celebrate that failures, the right failures, right? In fact, when a lot of people embrace this change, not many people were successful. Many times we get caught up about measuring and rewarding for results, right? And it did not work, and we also made that mistake. And people were hesitant to embrace the change. For example, suddenly, if you look at TCS, there are a number of people, people used to pride about number of people they manage in the previous. So we used to have big projects. For example, Lloyds Bank, we have 2,500 of our consultants working in their digital transformation. For Marks & Spencer's, we have close to 3,000. So the so-called the group leader or the project leader for that Marks & Spencer's project manages 2,000 people. Right? Number of people you manage, what is the size of a portfolio, all measured success. And suddenly in this new change, we wanted them to embrace the agile, embrace the digital projects where they will manage 5 people and completely new ways of working, right? And so we sort of changed our performance management, how we tell the stories of success, how we reward those people in terms of if you are constantly doing the same thing, same role for the last 4 years, and you achieve the same kind of success, and it's very difficult to call yourself successful in terms of rewards, promotions, whatever it is. But if you move to a new leadership role, and it's much smaller portfolio, but the effort and the process gets you much better recognition. Okay, I think that's really the key, right? To encourage the risk-taking culture, and in fact. So many of our stories, and here is where the storytelling is important. Like a lot of our stories in terms of what is successful suddenly stop talking about, we never spoke about the so-called huge project where we saved a lot of costs. A 50 million project, which is on traditional way of delivering, received less coverage than a $5 million project, which is digital transformation. Right? So you create that culture by rewarding and then communicating. And we shouldn't underestimate the value of storytelling in terms of communication during times of change.
A subject that's close to my heart is about how do you keep all employees at different levels engaged during periods of change within the organisation. It strikes me that also brings forward, in terms of this panel and leadership development, a sort of, when we talk about leaders, many organisations still have this very old-fashioned view of what leadership actually is. And I think Phil used a phrase about the democratisation of leadership development, implying in order to get meaningful change, you have to have leadership at all at all levels. I mean, is this something you're seeing in the stats, Adrian? It's all about sort of about leadership for all, if you like, you know.
Yeah, it's mixed, I'd say, in the stats coming from the survey. So, life's complicated for a leader at the moment. There's transactional leadership doing your day job. There's transformation we're talking about. There's lots of research around kind of enterprise contribution and giving back more than just your department and breaking down silos. And now we have digital transformation and all these new things on top. I think what's helping in terms of objectives and just other things is the success of purpose-led businesses, which again is very well documented. Those businesses where people can really feel their involvement and feel they can step up because they're making a difference, that helps enormously. I know colleagues as well who have moved businesses as well and suddenly find themselves in other areas and they're looking for that purpose, and that makes people smaller at the same time. What we see from the surveys, two things here is interesting. One, when it comes to the question around am I clear on my manager, my leader's objectives, the scores globally are pretty low. So we're in the 30s and 40s here for this area. So when you don't have that transparency, which is a critical thing for people's confidence, the sort of freedom to have new ideas, to challenge existing processes, if you don't quite know what your direct manager is working on, what's really going to either energise them or not, that can constrain things somewhat. So there's a huge amount of work to do from top employers around the world in that particular area. Fortunately, when it comes to these large change projects, and we look at alignment to business change and understanding of them, the scores are much higher there. So interestingly, that it works. There's a lot more effort, energy focused on the large change projects, but just going back to the day-to-day environments, there's work to do there.
Yeah. Okay. I'm conscious of the time. We've only got sort of 3 or 4 more minutes, but there's one really interesting question here, and apologies for all those I haven't been able to ask, specifically about the HR professions. And the question is, when we talk about digital transformation and other business changes, what uncertain changes do we see in the HR area, and how do we build HR leaders in the future? Andrew, Head of Talent Acquisition.
So I can answer that because I kind of put out that challenge to kind of overcoming our own fears and our desire for control, and I totally, absolutely believe that is something that certainly for a business like ours, highly innovation is everything, is just shining, looking in the mirror, whatever we want to call it, of being the expression of what we wish for the rest of the organisation, and that's fear. There's a lot of fear in that. So you've got to take some risks, and all of this adds together. But I'll tie it also into the employee engagement question just before that a little bit. Is how we're looking at it is that everybody's employee experience is slightly different. It's kind of we're all unique, and we all want something different out of that kind of process, and so. Even the quality of the conversations between HR, we've got to let go of this idea that we've been brilliant at doing listening and kind of having great conversations between our colleagues, and we are just as bad as all of the bad examples that we look at out there, maybe even worse, right? Because we're sitting there going, we've got to be kind of like the guys that really understand this, right? And so therefore haven't been practicing it, have just been pretending that we're the experts at it, and so. We've really just got to embrace it and practice it, and for me that boils down to just really high quality conversations, high quality listening to each other. What is the amazing employee experience for us in HR as well? And if we own that and look for that in our own careers, then we'll be able to help others receive, heal yourself right before you try and heal the organisation or whatever it is. It's really look inward. So that it's just as difficult for us, maybe even more difficult. It would be mine.
I'll leave the last.
Yes.
I'll leave the last word to
yes.
you on this.
Can't agree more. And the unfortunate truth is, and all of us know it, one of the last departments to change. We talk about change. The last departments to change effectively is HR, right? We still always get back to our old ways of working. Just one practical tip is that we definitely have to change and have different kinds of conversations. Be open-minded and all that. One thing that will help us do that is we should consciously start looking at staffing our HR department slightly differently. Right? The traditional way of payroll experts and the kind of qualifications, the kind of experience, you need to start being more inclusive ourselves. In terms of diversity of profiles, diversity of thought process. For example, we have a lot of digital experts right now in HR, which is language specialists, because we are experimenting with a whole new set of bots, right? For mentoring, that's for a different day, but we needed language specialists, we need engineers, we needed design thinkers, right? And different kinds of people question the way HR is done fundamentally differently. So once they come in, they come with a very different perspective. They also understand HR, and it adds to that. So they continuously challenge us in terms of new ways of working and why HR is not relevant to certain aspects and things like that. So one practical tip is we should embrace change, and one way to help us get there is look at staffing HR department itself differently. Like, let us be much more open-minded about who can do certain roles. Yes. We always think, oh, that has a lot of legal complications. You need an expert with 15 years of this thing. Nothing like that, right? So we should be ready to experiment. We should be ready to practice what we preach others.
Yeah. Great. Okay. So that's it. I mean, I don't think we could ever hope to achieve any final answers to these questions. These are big questions. But I hope that those sorts of insights have given you, food for thought, judging by the number of questions that we got. I think they definitely did. So that's fantastic. So in the time-honoured fashion, I'd like you to thank Ram, Andrew and Adrian.